Hello, in this video I'm going to be running through the machine and work centre maintenance, or the machine work centre maintenance form. This is one of the critical areas of the system, and particularly in the data setup of the system. It's essentially where you enter all your machine centres that do work on the shop floor. There's various areas of the form and I'll work through them in each individual area. This form is specific for, this form is suitable for the main system and for Redthorn SP. There are some elements of it that won't be suitable for SP, the resource scheduling elements, but I'll go through them as I talk about them. The form is in the planning and engineering folder, both in the SP workflow and in the main drop-down list for the main system in planning. So I've opened it up, and firstly I have some machine centres already in here, so I'll bring up a current machine centre and talk through the data against it. So if I bring up this first machine centre, so firstly machine centres are numbered and they then have a description which will carry through to the plannings and the routings when you're creating the routings. There's a standard description for machine centre, which will again drop into the routings and onto job cards, but you could have a database of those descriptions which can be chosen when you set them up. And this particular item, the CNC mill, has 2 current operation descriptions, but I could have as many as I like, and I could add more here. Adding more there will mean that when you're on the creating material and labour planning, on the labour planning, the routing, you'll be able to right click on the description and choose from your op database. That's a standard description. Status is fairly obvious, it's running or out of service, so you might want to take machine centre down or out of service from a scheduling point of view, and also just to mark it that way if you're not using the resource scheduler. Status reason is just exactly as it sounds, it's the reason for taking it out. You can group machine centres for reporting purposes. So this one I've applied to MAC. You don't need to group machine centres, but you can do. It's for reporting purposes only. It doesn't help in the planning. You plan to the machine centre rather than a group. And memo field is to add further information on the machine. This checkbox here, group for batch cards. If you run the full system and you have group batch cards, if you highlight this, it means that you can create group batch cards for this machine centre. Now, that's a situation where you have multiple jobs going on to a machine at once, and you want to record the time and data capture against all those at once, so you create a batch card for that whole batch. So checking that will allow that machine to be batched in group batch cards and the group batch cards screen. I don't have this one batched. So that's this piece of information, and I'll go down to the charge out rates per hour, and really we only really need to talk about the top 3, because the lower 2 are historic fields that have come from previous modules and previous versions of the system. So for modern use, if you like, these 2 in particular need to be understood. So the standard cost of £40 an hour, this cost here you can estimate based on this cost, but it's also the machine cost that will be used every time you produce a cost margin report and costing information. So costing information for a machine centre will come from the standard cost. So when you run a cost margin report, it'll be based on £40 an hour for this machine centre. You can also set a global costing as well, and when you run estimates, you can estimate on a global item, but this is the standard cost for this machine centre. You can then set a premium and an others, which is kind of like 2 premiums. So for this item, I've just got a premium of £55. And what that's doing for me is saying is when I run an estimate, if I run the estimate on the premium, I'm running the estimate on what I want to charge it out at, not the cost. So I can get an estimate that either produces an estimated cost, or I could run it in premium and produce an estimate based on actually what I want to sell it for. So these 2 numbers are very important, and then others gives me the flexibility of having 3 of those. You can set these charge out rates at a part and customer level as well, certainly a part level in part product maintenance, so you can have those specific for a part. Across on the right hand side, this area of the system is all related to the scheduling. So I'll just run through these in turn. These will also be covered in the scheduling video. Capacity means there's a capacity of 2. That's essentially telling me I've got 2 machine centres, 2 CNC vertical mills. Now there's a debate always whether you have 2 different machine centres with 2 different names, which could be 100 and 101, or the same machine centre and a capacity of 2. This all comes down on how you plan work to machines, whether you can plan work to machines and then just say I don't mind whether it goes on either of these 2, or whether you specifically want to plan to like machines. In this case, I have essentially, for this purposes of scheduling, I have 2 of this version of the vertical mill. Capacity is finite, so when it runs a schedule, it will plan finite. The other option is infinite. Efficiency rate, 100%. It's running 100% efficiency for scheduling point of view, so altering that will alter the way the scheduling numbers calculate. Movement time means when I schedule, it'll always put a movement time. So if I put 1 hour in there, it'll always put an hour prior to its operation. So you can put in a movement time against every time the CNC mill is accessed on a planning. You can also put movement times physically onto routings, which is probably the recommended way of doing it. But some machine centres, if they always demand a movement time, you can put a movement time here. And lastly, this is the strategy of how this will be loaded by the scheduler if you have a multiple capacity. So a capacity of 2, it could load it sequentially 1, 2, 1, 2, least loaded, most loaded or first available, or follow the global strategy which you can set in scheduling. So these are the main areas. When you add a new one, you just add the new number and type out the information. Lastly, on the screen we have calendar. If you're using the calendar for scheduling, it'll use the calendar here, which you can also set by clicking the shift button. And using this calendar means when it schedules, it'll schedule to this calendar. If you don't use the calendar and you schedule, it'll simply schedule to the calendar that's set on the resource scheduling screen, or the resource scheduling module. Finally, some of the buttons down the bottom. If there is movement, you can see where you have planned movement, so you can get a view. You can run a report of planned movement, of which this machine doesn't have any. If you want to remove movement times, you can. So you can say I'm going to remove all the movement times across my plannings. You can see and look at repairs and maintenance. So you can see a brief maintenance history of this machine. And it's advisable, if you're going to take a machine down to maintain it, you can change the status here, and also for scheduling purposes you can schedule machine downtime. You can run a replace machine center, so if you're taking a machine out of commission, you can run a replace machine center, and in fact 101 is a better example for this. So for the horizontal mill, if I click machine center, you can see these are all the areas where I'm using in planning machine 101. And if I want to go and do a global change to a different machine, say I've bought a new machine or I'm retiring a machine, you can do that here, or you can do it on an individual basis here. So I could default them all to 102 if I wanted to. I'm not going to though. So that concludes the work centre maintenance video. One of the key data setups in the area. Important to consider your capacity and your machining if you're using scheduling, and remember the op database is available for having bespoke text on routing on the operation details on routes.